As we move through the 21st century, we're going to have more and more species that are conservation species. They only exist because we've conserved them. And we have to understand that the planet, we've domesticated the planet. And we as a human will be deciding what stays and what can't be saved. And the more that we benchmark, the more that we collaborate, greater synergies can occur for actually conserving and doing greater and larger efforts in conservation of species worldwide.
We are so excited to offer this benchmarking tool to highlight the plant conservation activities your garden already does. The tool provides great information for your garden. It tells you how you compare with peer institutions for each question. And one amazing thing, the questions are aligned with targets within the North American Botanic Garden Strategy for Plant Conservation.
The Conservation and Biodiversity Benchmarking tool is really valuable in two directions. It allows you to understand what the assets and resources are that you're putting into your institution's conservation activities, but it also allows you to contribute to an understanding of what the outcomes, what the impacts are of your institution's activities.
In this day and age, it's essential that we understand what our progress is towards conservation issues. Thinking about the various targets for the global strategy for plant conservation, knowing simply how many plants you might have in your collection that are threatened, rare, and endangered. How many do you have now? How many might you have tomorrow? The only way you're ever going to understand how you're making progress towards these is to constantly go in and benchmark. Assess what you've got now, set some goals, come back in the next year. And also compare that with what other gardens might be doing, maybe even gain some ideas. And I think some of the benchmarking tools that we have available to us now enable us to make this progress.
Benchmarking of conservation is really important for public gardens, and it's important for really all teams in a public garden. So it's important for a science team to be able to understand what gaps that exist in the research that they're doing. It's important for the horticulture team to understand what plants they need to be including in the living collection. It's important for the education team to understand which plants and what conservation efforts they're going to be educating the public about. And it's important for the rest of the garden, the marketing people, the development people, to understand what conservation work is being done by the garden, what gaps exist, and where opportunities might exist.
Gardens practice conservation in a whole bunch of different ways, but few gardens totally recognize that contribution, much less relate it to a more global point of view. The joint American Public Gardens Association and Botanic Gardens Conservation International Plant Conservation and Biodiversity Benchmarking Platform establishes a new era where gardens can measure their activities and establish themselves as peers and leaders in conservation. They can take the conservation efforts that they perform at a local scale, translate it to a national or even regional scale, but also more importantly to a global scale.
So join hundreds of our fellow gardens across Canada, the US, and Mexico to measure our collective conservation capacity and make sure that no species goes extinct under our watch.
So with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you some of the different tools that we have for benchmarking. So all of our benchmarking platforms all originate here under our resources and tools platforms. And from our benchmarking studies platform, we have different deadlines that are established. We have different promotional videos. And here for conservation and biodiversity benchmarking, a link to our plant conservation and biodiversity benchmarking homepage, featuring the webinar, user's guide, the study questions themselves, and plant conservation and biodiversity benchmarking, because of its nature and because of what we want to get and support gardens globally, is always available to members and non-members. And we have entry points in English and in Spanish. So as a member and going in, I'll reach a splash screen. And for the rest of this, we're going to switch over to a demonstration garden, Agnes Arbor Garden. Elizabeth Britton will be the demonstration user. This splash screen that comes up is filled with some very useful data. And so oftentimes we feel the need to just click through these splash screens, but you can see the status of the platform. You can see that for your garden, who you're logged in as, what questions you have or haven't answered, and then some useful links both to the user's guide or to the support page or some other organizational information. So that splash screen is a really useful tool. You can always come back to it by clicking on welcome message. You can always get any support from the platform by clicking on this button that gives you a whole bunch of different pieces of information. You can always, a new feature this year, download all the questions so that if you need to gain the answers to other questions from different departments or different divisions in your organization, you can parse those questions out to them. We've shown examples of that in the last two webinars this afternoon. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And Sarah, go ahead and you can share your screen, and we'll make sure that everyone is up and going, and you can take people through plant conservation and biodiversity benchmarking. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Casey. Can you see my screen now? Are you seeing the benchmarking page?
Yes.
We are good.
Fabulous, thank you. I will go back just briefly and share with you this general landing page, because you don't need to go all the way into the platform, the benchmarking platform, in order to see some of the features and read the user's guide ahead of time. So I just want to point this out. This is where Casey would have taken you. If you go to the resources and tools and go to benchmarking, you can go specifically to the conservation and biodiversity page. And here we have the benchmarking user's guide. We have it in Spanish. We also have the benchmarking study questions, so you can download those on their own if you want to read those ahead. And you can also get those in Spanish. And then something that's very special, and I just want to make another comment about this partnership. We're very, very happy we were able to work with BGCI, and we have the executive director of BGCI US with us, Abby Meyer. We did this partnership with BGCI as well as the United States Botanic Garden. And through this partnership, we were really able to make this particular benchmarking platform available not just to our membership with the American Public Gardens Association, but also to any garden within North America. So that's why if you're looking at some of this and it looks a little confusing, we have this members, non-members, and then as you go down, you can see that introductory video, which is really wonderful. And then you can also see that there's an entryway for gardens who are North American gardens not within our membership. So it's very, very inclusive, and we're hoping to get as much participation as possible without any barrier. So with that, I'd like to point out just a couple of other things that may be of use. If you are a person at your garden who is a specialist in conservation, perhaps conservation is in your title or science, or you have a pretty specific conservation role, it is likely that you already have access. We have to grant access to this platform on the back end. All of the main contacts, which are usually the executive directors of gardens, are automatically in this platform as well. But please do not be concerned if you've tried to go in and you didn't immediately gain access. If the system doesn't know your name, it is no problem. You can absolutely request from us. The reason we just haven't made it too much general access is because we want to be able to coordinate a couple of main individuals at a garden who are managing this. That said, this platform is really a very interesting collaboration for a garden. Generally, you all are very smart and you probably know a ton about your own garden's operations, especially when it comes to conservation, but you probably don't know every detail. And something that will really help when you download and look at the questions ahead of time is thinking about, are there some things that I probably need to reach out to someone else in another department to get? You may be very aware of a lot of the you know, a lot of the research or a lot of the conservation activities, but you may not really have a strong handle on, you know, all of the education topics and how those break down at your garden. So that's a good example of where you may want to look at all of these questions ahead of time, reach out to department heads who are in other departments that you might collaborate with, and give a little bit of lead time to understanding what, you know, what pieces you yourself personally might not know, and that you would want to ask someone else at your garden to assist you with. I want to just pause there and just see if Abby wants to make any other general comments as I'm giving this introduction.
Thanks, Sarah. Just that we chose these main topics to cover from A to Z, any potential or common, I guess is maybe another word to use, contribution toward plant conservation, whether that's talking to folks or educating folks about the importance of threatened plants or how to conserve them, or training them, to actually conserving them on the ground or in collections. Thanks, Sarah.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I think Abby and I can walk you through each of these sections. This is organized, other than the garden overview, which is fairly basic in terms of content. There are really 5 main sections of this benchmarking platform. And we can walk you through some of the highlights of, you know, what we're going for in each of those sections. I also want to point out that as you go to each of these sections, there is an opportunity to watch a video. These are really just, you know, very short. All of them are, I want to say they're 2 minutes. And each of these explain anything that we knew ahead of time may arise as a question. So I know a lot of folks, you know, we've learned people don't really like to read the directions. I myself barely read directions when I get something new. I definitely am with you. But we also have found that there are some very typical sorts of questions people might have. And the way that we have tried to assist with this is the first line of defense is obviously giving you details. If we're talking about something very specific in a question, the green text, when you click on the green text, it's going to show you an explanation. So here is an example in the garden overview where it says year incorporated. If you're wondering how to put that into the block, it explains it. You know, and we're giving a little extra explanation. This may not be the same year that you were open to the public, for instance, because we're being specific about incorporation. So in every case where we could add a detail that would be useful to you so that you aren't wondering how to answer something, we tried to put that embedded in the questions. But there are certainly some examples where in certain topic areas, it just may not be totally obvious to you. And you're absolutely welcome to reach out to us at any time if you have a specific question. But there are also lots of examples where, if you go into leadership and governance, watching the little short video, you might actually get that explanation that you're looking for that might not have been in the details. So I'll share that. I think what we'll do now, Abby, if this sounds good to you, I think we just may pause briefly on each of the 5 sections and just give a little bit of an introduction to what the purpose of that section is. And we can certainly take, I think we can, if Richard is helping me out, I think we can take questions if there are specific questions on the different areas. Abby, does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, and I will also share that there is an option as well right now to see our first report. So if you're really curious, and I'm just going to very briefly drag this over because I'm really proud of this. I think this is a really wonderful example of a document. This is just from our first round, the first time we launched this. But as we are gathering more and more momentum, and as more gardens are participating, we're really excited that we're able to offer you the type of reporting on these topics that allow you some really strong statements for stakeholders, really strong statements about the work you're doing, and then a relationship with global and national targets and strategies. So I'm just sharing that with you. If you haven't seen, this is just a sample of what the report looks like. And we're, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll just also reiterate, I wasn't quite sure when we would get to it, but these global and North American strategies are a really important component to this benchmarking. And I'd really like to drive it home that knowing your institution's contributions to the strategies are really important, but also knowing the community's contributions to the strategy targets are also really important, because this year is the year that both the global strategy and the North American strategy, and probably every other regional strategy for plant conservation, are due. They're coming up for renewal at the end of this year. So we need to know where we've come, where we are, in order to assess and set targets for the next decade. So that's really a big push we're doing this year to gather data for North America.
And again, that's really why this is so such a special project for us, because it has, and I think Kim McHugh actually said this really well. It's really a twofold benefit. Whenever you're participating in conservation and biodiversity benchmarking, you are participating in a much greater effort. You're connecting to, regional and national and global efforts. You're really aligning. You're figuring out, how you're working within that. But you're also able to, and this is where we really hope that larger participation will be very impactful. We're hoping that we have enough participation so that you all will be able to use, as you're doing that reporting, and you're using the dynamic nature of dynamic benchmarking, you will actually be able to do comparisons, really select, and if you've been watching some of the other webinars, and I'm sure Casey has touched on this, the ability to select, oh, I just want to look at gardens that are similar to my garden in size or in region of the country. We're really able to do so much more and look at efforts and understand our each garden's role in those efforts if we have enough participation that we have a bigger data pool that we can pull those comparisons. So I just want to emphasize that. It gets more and more exciting to be able to generate those reports as you're able to have more to look at. Just going quickly now to the leadership and governance section. There are 3 different portions of the governance section. We're really looking ultimately at whether your garden has really broad buy-in, whether your leadership is valuing plant conservation, and just all the ways that resonates. We're looking at engagement. We're also looking at financial commitment. This is the part where, we have a lot of help text, just because, there's a lot of questions about the difference between what we call the permanent budget versus soft money type contributions. So this is where we really will try to assist you if you run into any trouble with calculating amounts. But these are really important because they give us a broad sense of conservation funding. And then again, we also have a fairly complex set of questions about staffing. But again, we're really looking to get a broad understanding of how staff are spending their time on conservation activities. Abby, do you have any other thoughts before we move on to another section?
No, well said.
Okay, we will go to, let me just go back to the broad view. This is how it looks. We have these really nice little 0% complete, so you can feel very satisfied when you are more complete with your questions. And we have the ex situ and in situ conservation capacity sections, research and expertise, and then education and communication. These are all the different sections we're going to be looking at.
And those 4 are really the meat of what we're after here. And by the way,
do you want to keep going? You can go ahead and if you want to start talking about Brexit too.
Sure. By the way, those 4 sections are really what we're hoping will also be a great model for institutions to start tracking formally if they're not already. So some of these numbers the first time around might be hard to come up with at your institution, but what we've heard from institutions that have completed the benchmarking is that once they found out that it was a useful number to track from year to year, and also to let their stakeholders and leadership know about. So the metrics that around this are hopefully beneficial at several levels. So this ex situ section, there are, I think, a couple different pages of it. There's one on policy and practices, dealing with, and then one on genetic diversity, exactly.
That's actually a really great point that you just made, Abby, and I feel like I want to reiterate it just because again, it's I think of it as this Susan Pell quote because we have her on that video talking about this. But I think we can't emphasize enough that this is not intended to intimidate any garden from participation. I mean, if your garden is, again, we're looking at policies, we're looking at practices, if your garden is somewhere on this spectrum of, what, we don't have a policy on this yet, but we're intending it, that's wonderful. There's so much value in capturing not just intent, but if this is sharing with you ideas for where you might go, so many gardens have capacity, gardens that are working in all different scales have so much capacity in a number of different areas, and sometimes just knowing that you could be working on something or tracking a specific data point and that could be important can also be of value. So I think it's just it's really good to know that our intention here isn't to get all gardens participating because they're already doing all of these practices, and it would be very hard, I think, to find any garden that is doing all of these practices at a high level. I mean, this is a very diverse survey.
Exactly. And a little bit of background too, Sarah, that might be helpful for the group is knowing that we worked with, it was about somewhere between 5 and 10 different institutions across the country for about 5 years through, led by Jenny Cruz Sanders, formerly at the Atlanta Botanical Garden and now at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. But she led an effort to figure out what are all the possible different contributions that gardens can make. And that's what these questions are based on. And then we aligned them with the strategies, like we said earlier. So they're intended to be very comprehensive and not necessarily what everyone should be doing, but what different unique ways people or institutions can contribute.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. I mean, there is not one right way to answer this entire survey. And, we're in the in situ conservation section. This has, it only has a policy and practices section. So that's the entirety of this portion. But again, we're trying to also, we've got, as you can see, there's an ecoregion question. I mean, a lot of this, a lot of the work being done by your gardens, we know, is going to be driven by mission and many specific, areas of specific research or practices, or it may be something that is unique to your garden. So we're really trying to get give you as many opportunities to share activities that you're working on as possible.
And Sarah, could you click on one of the down arrows just to see the answer options, because it's
absolutely.
a lot of these are yes, no. There's one question, the second question on acreage, but they're yes, no, or you have an intention to do so quite soon. So hopefully that can capture, you know, where your institution currently is.
And it's wonderful for us to capture a trajectory. I mean, you know, there's nothing better than if you're able to participate right now and say, oh, my garden is either hasn't even considered this thing yet, but you know, next year you fill this out, or in another 2 years you fill it out, and you're already like moving on a trajectory. If we can chart growth in some of these areas and ideas, it would be also so valuable for our industry. I'm going to go ahead to the, okay, I did not save. I'm now on the research and plant conservation expertise section. There is a research section here, and then an expertise section. This is where we dive down a bit, trying to get a sense of some of the staffing that your garden has to do a number of these actions. Again, very important because it really gives us a sense of, you know, or it gives you all a sense of, you know, what are other gardens doing? How are gardens putting their commitment to plant conservation into an actual staffing situation? How are they able to support activities? What are averages for, you know, for supporting different types of activities? And then also we talk a little bit about just how your training staff, here we've got some questions about professional development opportunities. So you know, is your garden doing in-person professional development with, say, horticulture staff? Are you doing a training in person?
Yeah,
you know,
and some of the detail sections can give examples for what those hands-on versus lecture opportunities are across institutions for training. But some of them can be, you know, like a brown bag on a certain topic where someone shares their expertise or knowledge. And it, yeah, basically just to demonstrate an institution's commitment to professional development around plant conservation. And then also the last question being, where are you broadly impacting the broader community? How do you share your expertise to affect regional or national or field-wide efforts?
So that is the second to last section. I'm going to go ahead to education and communication. This is one that I think is most typically not going to be as at the tips of your fingers if you are, say, in a head of science role. You're probably going to want to reach across and have a conversation with someone who is in the education department area. But this is very, very valuable to us. Thinking through, and I also, this is another interesting one where we realize trying to make this accessible to people in a broad area of the world. We understand not everybody is going through the same, you know, grade levels or working with the same segments of these school populations. So, you know, we made every attempt to try to make this accessible, but please reach out if you have questions.
Sarah, can we watch the video on this screen just to see what a video looks like? And it might actually cover some of these.
It would, but unfortunately, I think I'm having an inability to do to the sound correctly. And I apologize earlier. I thought I would be able to share.
Oh, we heard it. We heard it.
Oh, you heard it.
You just can't mute yourself, and then, or we won't hear it. But we did hear most of it.
Okay, I can. You know what? I will go ahead and pull this one up. I think it's a short one, and I will just try to hold really still so I'm not impacting the sound.
Thanks.
Welcome to the Education and Communication section. Please note that there are additional details and help text in green available for many of the questions that you can hide and unhide. This section will require detailed input from your education staff or department. A few notes. Because grade levels are not universal across countries, the age and grade levels provided in this section attempt to provide the main ranges. References to multiple contact programming are intended to determine minimum impact numbers.
On the school-based participation page, please estimate the percentage of curriculum that includes conservation and biodiversity, and compare your garden school-based program curriculum to the range of conservation-related topics provided, including climate change, crop and food security, sustainability, ex situ conservation, land management, and invasive species.
Non-school-based participation page. You may utilize the same process as on the school-based page, except this time focusing on after-school, weekend, family, and other programming not intended for formal school audiences. Here, you will use a similar method for estimating curriculum content related to the list of conservation and biodiversity topics provided.
The education content page aims to characterize the composition of all the educational programming that is conservation and biodiversity related. Please estimate which topics are most popular where requested.
The communications page may require input from your garden's marketing and communications staff or department, and relates to how well conservation and biodiversity is integrated into your garden's communications in a broad sense. This is Kim McHugh with the Desert Botanical Garden. It truly is helpful to include your education staff when attempting to answer these questions. Please remember, it is really important, though, to give adequate lead time to your education staff.
Great advice from Kim.
Completing the education and communication section.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Abby.
So hopefully, well, that was great advice from Kim, and hopefully that covered the bases, and this will make sense to your education staff as well. That was the intention, and so I'm good with this section if you are, Sarah.
Sure. I think what I'd like to do is open it up to questions in our chat function. If there's any specific area that you all would like Abby or me to speak to, if there was, I know we just kind of glanced through it, and we did point out that the various videos and instructions. Every one of those videos does have a real user making a statement about a point or a tip that they found useful. But if anyone has questions, I think we're intending just to go about 30 minutes on this webinar, and then allow for participants who are wanting to engage with us directly. So I'd like to open it up if there are any questions.
And I'm not sure, I have a question. I'm not sure how to submit this question, but I'll just say it maybe. This is Abby again. I don't know if we could have a show of hands. Can you raise your hand as a participant to see who is planning to complete this survey?
Richard might have to answer that question if hand raising is allowed. I think that is a function. Yes, it is. Oh my gosh, I see people already raising their hands. This is very exciting.
Great.
Oh, wow. Abby, this is really fun.
Awesome. I don't see it myself, but
I can put it on my screen, but I don't know if that's that. I don't think we should do that though, because then someone whose hand is not raised, I don't want them to feel bad.
that's okay.
If they're still on the fence and thinking about it, hopefully this webinar has pushed them over the top, and they're really excited about participating now.
Exactly. And I just want to say, there's a little bit of feedback on my side, but I do want to say some of this process actually is intended to spur on some helpful conversations at your institution, to get collection staff engaging with education staff, which are engaging with research, or if there is a separate conservation department, and also engaging with a volunteer department. If there are separate staff doing all of those different programs, it's always great to interface around conservation. I think this is a good process.
Absolutely. You know, we definitely want to, again, just emphasize the accessibility of this, this project as something that a garden at every possible level of interest in plant conservation can feel that this is available to you, you know, as a resource. And, you know, it's a tool, and it's definitely intended to help you make decisions. And if this is the first time that your garden is considering taking certain types of conservation actions, you know, we really want this tool to be available to you. If you are on your way to doing a great, and if you have been a champion and you've done a great deal of work in plant conservation, we love the idea of this tool being a way for you to engage with other gardens and offer your knowledge and your support.
Sarah, it's Richard. We do have a question in the Q&A. When is the due date for completion of this?
Right now we are advertising being open through April. Obviously, we like this to be as tight a turnaround as we can make it, just because we want to be able to open for comparative data. Casey, if you're still with us, do you have any other thought on cutoff? Is this gonna, I'm assuming this is gonna align with all of the other benchmarking platforms?
That's correct, Sarah. Right now we have it set up so that April 30th is the ending point. It's our intention going forward to synchronize all of these. With the other benchmarking profiles as well, we're offering the opportunity to do catch up for previous years, and to have it so that all the platforms have open data entry for every year from fiscal year end 2015 going forward. The other thing that I had to step away for a minute or two, but you may have already covered this, that in the garden profile area and some of the other questions that for you as a conservation professional may be challenging to answer. If your garden's a member of our organization, your administrators have basically answered all of these questions, and even several others in the platform. They were meant to have overlap with questions in gardens benchmarking. So that data is there, but you need to go get it from that professional and then re-enter it here, or encourage them to do this portion of the data entry there.
Thank you, Casey. That's exactly. We only covered that broadly, but not in terms of that really key point you just made, which is about the other benchmarking platforms, and that someone at your garden is likely already holding these very specific answers.
Yeah, and Sarah, if you scroll up, you'll see that download icon on the right-hand side, the black download icon that's below the fiscal years. In gardens benchmarking, in compensation and benefits benchmarking, and in plant conservation and biodiversity benchmarking, that's how you can download all the questions or just the questions for a specific section. And you can download them both with your responses or without your responses. So it's a great way to, and you download them in an Excel format, and it's a great way to be able to note where you found that information for a specific year, or to delegate that to somebody else, or to record what information you have and what information you don't have. And if you let me just share my screen real quickly, and then I'll share it back with you.
Please.
That's what this particular one is from Gardens Benchmarking for staffing, but you can see that as we go back to something like Garden Details, we have all that information. You can enter in your pertinent data as to what profile category you are, what memberships you have, the reporting period for the organization, and then figure out where you found that information. Where you found that information for staffing. It's a great tool to be able to use both in parsing out what portions of data you need filled out by others, but then, you know, where you found it, so you don't have to redo the scavenger hunt every year. So with that, I'll yield it back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Casey. I think that I'm done sharing content. I just want to say again how thankful I am for this partnership. I think conservation and biodiversity benchmarking is so valuable on so many levels. We're really excited to be offering it. And thank you so much, Abby, for participating in this with us from BGCI, as well as many thanks to those at USBG that have offered partnership and support in this process as well.
And this is Abby again. I'll just say thank you, Sarah. Those were great comments, and I agree with all of them. And thanks to all the attendees for your interest. And again, we are here nearly 24/7 to answer your questions. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Yeah, we're covering from the Pacific Coast to the East Coast. So we're happy to answer your questions. No question about benchmarking is too small, because we understand it can be the first couple of times you use this platform, it's fairly complicated, but we're excited to share it with you. Thanks so much for attending, everyone.
Thank you, Casey and Sarah.
Yep. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you all for attending. And again, any questions that you have that if you feel like are general for our benchmarking for any of the platforms, you can go ahead and send an email to info@publicgardens.org, and we're always happy to interface with you and to answer all the questions that you have. So with that, we're going to wrap up today. Just to note that for those who who may have missed this opportunity, we are recording these, and they will be available and posted in the different professional communities and online in our resource library. So thank you very much.